Good morning, class. This is going to serve as your 18.1 lecture. This is our first section of chapter 18, and we're going into human resources. And if you felt like, oh, the course is kind of like marketing, it's kind of like entrepreneur, or kind of like economics, we're kind of going in a completely different direction at this point, and we're moving into entrepreneurship and human resources. And a lot of what we're doing in these two lectures and what we're doing this week is going to help us actually keep building out our project. So one major objective, we're going to identify the components of human resources management, which is the part of managing people in business. So the main idea, the most critical important resource for any business is the people involved and the people working at that business. Employees are recruited, hired, trained, and kept, and have a major impact on a company's performance. So I have a Mark Cuban video in here. We're going to save this for later, though. This is some of your vocabulary for today, and we'll go over it as usual as we kind of go through everything. So human resources is the company's largest investment, and a lot of companies, their greatest expense is the actual people that work there. Employees have obviously they get paid, but you're doing more than paying them. You're paying taxes for them, and then they're paying taxes as well. The point being, if you want to keep them and not spend time on it, you have to pay them an appropriate amount. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But just keep in mind that one of the most expensive parts of running a business is paying people. And since we were talking about human resources, I put a lot of photos up here because they're just, when I was looking and trying to make this presentation a little bit more spazzy, there are just so many stock photos of people in business. And it's so hard to make take an actual picture of someone just doing their job at the workplace. I don't know. I found it humorous to me. So, human resource management, next word, is the part of the business concerned about recruiting and managing people. And all that rolls into. So I give you a second to write this down. So, the components of human resources, this is what someone in HR does. And if you guys were running a business, you might hire an HR manager, or it might be you until your business is big enough. But they're going to recruit employees, get them from somewhere else, manage them, make sure they're doing all right, oversee them in some way, shape, or form, resolve any conflicts, I'm not sure what that ensuring is, resolve day-to-day problems, ensuring equal opportunity, should have known that, and then handling employee terminations. So, in regards to managing union dealings, that's really where HR comes in. In businesses, they have their own managers that manage departments of people, whether that's an accounting manager to manage all of the accountants, or a finance manager, the people working in the finance department, and operations managers working in operations as well as sales managers, right? That's who's managing various departments. HR is going to manage how they deal with the union if a union exists. And then HR might also manage the benefits package offered to various people. So, and that's where overseeing pay and benefits comes in. So, make sure you have these down and kind of make sure you understand and know what they all mean. We'll get into a lot of this. I have a video for unions and some of the pay and benefits aspects coming up in a second. Ensuring equal opportunity. HR is really responsible for making sure that a company is giving everyone an equal right and not discriminating on anyone based on those illegal discrimination aspects that exist. And we'll get into those in the next section of the chapter. But one thing that I always found interesting was that certain things are illegal to discriminate against, and then certain things are very legal to discriminate against. And an easy example of that is a company will very quickly discriminate against your education level, for example. And that's perfectly legal. It's perfectly fine. If they feel the job requires a master's in business administration and you don't have a master's, they're going to say, hey, you don't meet the qualifications, moving on. They can't, however, discriminate against you for things like race, gender, sexuality, and there's a couple others that we'll get into. And human resources, in a lot of cases, is going to handle terminations. So for recruiting is this process by which we get people into the job. And you might recruit from within your company to elevate people. And honestly, the people working for that company love that because now they can visualize themselves moving up and being promoted to the assistant manager and the manager and so on and so forth. Recruiting itself, you would love to get teachers and from other schools, right? Because you know they have experience, for example, if we needed to fill teachers' positions. We do recruiting with ads and job boards and employment agencies, and I have an example here for a package handler. This is from Indeed.com, and this is their just ad that they throw on there. And some of the benefits they have: part-time, working 17.5 to 20 hours a week. You get education assistance of $2,600 to $5,200, so on and so forth. Here's what you got to be capable of doing. You got to lift packages that weigh between 25 and 35 pounds, but may weigh up to 70. And part-time employees usually work 3.5 to 4 hours each day, and it even shows all the shifts they have available. And it's in Plainfield. It was just something to put up here so you guys can see what some of these look like, and so on and so forth. So labor unions. Labor unions are groups of people that pool together so that they have greater ability and strength. So, for example, we have a teachers union in the school. And if there's a disagreement with the union in the school, then the teachers may choose to strike, which means none of the teachers show up and no school is done. Well, at least all the teachers in the labor union would not show up. This creates the people then now have power to try and push or work with the company. You see a lot of things like General Motors and Ford have large unions where the unions work with the company leadership in order to say, hey, this is what we want to do, this is where we want to move benefits, or the company is saying, hey, this is where we want to take benefits away, and they have to come to an agreement for a period of time in order to have a contract and let people work. So I'm going to play this video for you. And it's all about labor markets.
Welcome to Crash Course Economics. I'm Adrienne Hill.
And I'm Jacob Clifford, and today we're going to talk about labor markets, a pretty important topic.
Unless you're independently wealthy or fine with living in your parents' basement, you probably need to get a job. But how do you even get a job, and what kind of job should you get? In a lot of ways, it comes down to supplying a skill that someone else demands. This is Cristiano Ronaldo. He makes about $20 million a year playing soccer, or football, depending on where you live. Pretty much everybody would agree no one needs that kind of money. But does he deserve it? How do his employers, the Real Madrid Football Club, justify his huge salary? Admittedly, the market for professional athletes is complex, but on some level it's supply and demand. The supply of people that have the skills to be world-class soccer players is low, and the demand for world-class soccer players is incredibly high. Ronaldo might be willing to play for only $10 million a year. It's a lot of money. He might even play for $5 million, and if he really truly loved the beautiful game, he might do it for free. So why is he getting $20 million? This goes back to that really high demand. Having a superstar on your team generates millions in tickets and merchandise sales. It might help you win some of the many cups up for grabs in international football. So Real Madrid thought Ronaldo and his double scissor move were worth $20 million, and Ronaldo agreed. So they have a contract. These same ideas explain how wages are determined in nearly every labor market. Let's go to the thought bubble.
Usually when Stan goes to the mall, he's the buyer. He demands sunglasses and giant pretzels, and the businesses supply them. But if he wants a job at the mall's pretzel shop, the roles are reversed. Since he supplies labor, he's now the seller, and the pretzel shop owner becomes the buyer, a buyer of labor. Now that's when wage negotiation ensues. Stan could insist on a wage of $25 an hour for his pretzel skills, but the owner will point out that they could easily hire other people for much less. The owner could offer Stan a wage of only $1 per hour, but Stan would point out that he could easily get paid more at the froyo shop. In the end, they agree on a wage that makes each of them better off. The owner gets some help around the store, and Stan earns money so he can buy even cooler sunglasses. Economists call this voluntary exchange. The supply of labor depends on the number of people that are qualified to do the job. So Stan would love to get paid more, but since warming up pretzels doesn't require extensive skills, the supply of capable workers is high, and consequently the wage is relatively low. But that doesn't mean Stan's going to work for peanuts. The wage offered has to cover his opportunity cost, the value of his lost free time, and the money he could be making doing something else. The demand for labor depends on the demand for the products a business sells. Economists call this derived demand. If pretzel demand is booming, then store owners are going to want more pretzel makers. If other stores also need more employees, demand for workers will increase and drive up wages. Thanks, operator. Supply and demand explain why wages are different for different professions. Engineers are in high demand because they produce the products that many consumers want, and their supply is limited because the training for these jobs is pretty difficult. Social workers and historians aren't paid as much, even though their work is important, because demand is relatively low and supply is relatively high. It's not rocket science.
Supply and demand explain a lot, but there are several reasons why wages in a labor market don't end up at a competitive equilibrium. Sometimes workers get paid less not because they have different skill levels, but because of their race, ethnic origin, sex, age, or other characteristics. This is called wage discrimination. Wages might also be unfairly low when a labor market is a monopsony, when there's only one company hiring and workers are relatively immobile. When you're the only employer, workers have to take what you offer or they're out of luck. Take the NCAA, the organization that regulates college athletics in the U.S. Many economists point out that high-profile college athletes are generating millions of dollars for their schools, but they're forced to accept a very low wage of a scholarship with free tuition. Now sure, baseball and hockey players can skip straight to the pros, but the NFL prohibits drafting football players until 3 years after high school, and NBA teams can't draft basketball players until they're 19. There are some situations where wages might actually be higher than market equilibrium. For example, some employers might voluntarily offer higher than normal wages to increase worker productivity and retention. Economists call this efficiency wages. Henry Ford doubled the wages of assembly line workers in 1914 to keep them from seeking jobs elsewhere, and this still goes on today. You may not be completely happy with your job, but if it offers way more than what everyone else is paying, you're less likely to quit. Unions can also drive up wages. A union is an organization that advances the collective interests of employees and strives to improve working conditions and increase wages. They do this through collective bargaining. Representatives for the workers negotiate with employers, and if their demands aren't met, workers go on strike and stop production altogether. Although unions were once very strong in the U.S., union membership and their strength has declined since the 1950s. At their height, approximately 1 in 3 American workers were in a labor union. These days it's more like 1 in 9, and the largest unions represent workers in the public sector, like teachers and firefighters. Wages might also not be at equilibrium when there's a minimum wage, basically a price floor that prevents employers from paying workers below a specific amount. Technically in the U.S., minimum wage affects less than 3% of workers, but the Brookings Institution estimates that an increase in the minimum wage likely wouldn't just impact that small slice of the labor market. It would also drive up the wages of people who make just above the minimum wage. According to Brookings, that ripple effect could raise the wages of nearly 30% of the workforce. The debate over whether or not there should be a minimum wage and how high that minimum wage should be gets pretty heated pretty fast. Some classical economists argue against nearly all forms of government manipulation in competitive markets. They say the minimum wage not only leads to unemployment, but it actually hurts the people it claims to help. Their logic goes something like this. A minimum wage deters employers from hiring unskilled workers, hiring only skilled or semi-skilled workers instead. These economists argue that the minimum wage does little or nothing to alleviate poverty, since instead of earning a minimum wage, unskilled workers end up earning no wage at all. The economists that support a minimum wage argue that real-life labor markets aren't as competitive or transparent as classical economists suggest. They believe that employers have the upper hand when it comes to negotiating wages, and and that individual workers lack bargaining power. I'm not going to tell you what to think, but think about it like this. If a grocery store wasn't required to pay $7.25 an hour, and the grocery store was the only place hiring, they could likely squeeze individual employees to accepting lower than market value. In this interpretation, minimum wage isn't interfering with competitive markets as much as it's correcting a market failure. Remember antitrust laws that prevent powerful monopolies from charging higher prices? Economists that support minimum wage laws say they prevent employers from using their power to exploit workers. The economists who are entirely opposed to minimum wage laws are losing the policy battle. Most countries around the world have minimum wage laws, and many of those countries without them have de facto minimum wages set by collective bargaining agreements. But even among economists who support some sort of minimum wage, there's disagreement over how high that minimum wage should be and what raising the minimum wage might do to the economy. Consider the U.S. The current federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. In 2014, 600 economists, including 7 Nobel Prize winners, signed a letter arguing that the minimum wage should be increased to $10.10 an hour. They argued that raising the minimum wage could have a small benefit to the economy. Workers with their newly increased wages would spend more. This would increase demand and perhaps help stimulate employment. But some of those same economists balked when it came to the question of raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. They argue that even if a $15 an hour minimum wage might make sense in an expensive city like Los Angeles or New York, where the median income is relatively high, it could have a significant negative effect on employment in a city or town where incomes are lower. If economics was a pure science, we could just test these ideas under controlled circumstances. We could have one state set a significantly higher minimum wage than its neighbor and see what happens. It turns out that happened in 1992, and economists David Card and Alan Kruger studied it. New Jersey raised its minimum wage from $4.25 to $5.05, while Pennsylvania kept theirs at $4.25. The economists surveyed large fast food chains along the state's shared border and found that workers didn't get fired. In fact, employment in New Jersey actually increased, but it's far from settled. There have also been studies that indicate raising the minimum wage does increase unemployment. A relatively recent survey of economists by the University of Chicago found that a small majority think raising the minimum wage to $9 an hour would make it noticeably harder for poor people to get work. But, and this is where it gets interesting, a slim majority also thought the increase would be worthwhile because the benefits to people who could find jobs at $9 an hour would outweigh the negative effect on overall employment.
Very few economists argue that a higher minimum wage will end poverty, but some argue that it could reduce poverty. The minimum wage doesn't exist in a vacuum. Policies that fight poverty should also focus on providing education and skills.
Those skills are what the labor market values. It's those skills that are in short supply and high demand and will command higher wages. So while you're waiting for economists to figure all this out, you might want to learn a new skill, practice your double scissor, and maybe take Ronaldo's job.
Thanks for watching Crash Course Economics, which is made with the help of all these awesome people. You can help keep Crash Course.
Alright. So hopefully you got something out of that, a little bit about labor unions, a little about how labor markets work. So we're going into training and development, the next aspect of kind of what HR does. And they will provide both educational and development activities. And they'll do this with new hires and they'll do this with existing employees, but essentially you're putting some kind of course together to make your employee better. That might just be 30 minutes of one-on-one time with your employee showing them how something works. That might be as simple as, hey, this is a program, this is how we do it, this is how it functions, this is anything that they might want to know about it. But educational activities are human relation workshops, prepare employees for advancing in the organization. Developmental activities might be things like an industry conference that prepares managers to lead a company in the future, or something that is more oriented towards personal development and is more of a very long-term thought process. How can you be a better leader? How can you be better with your communication skills? We want to make you better for the future, things that you will use on and on for the rest of your life. And a good comparison, hopefully you got that down. Actually, I'll give you 10 more seconds to get that. So I like to make this comparison of training versus development. And so in training, we're talking about what you're doing right now, and we're looking to fix or improve something immediately. Some kind of skill that it has a deficit that needs to be better, whether it's sales for a selling job or customer service skills. And then development is the flip side of that. We're trying to make you a future leader in the company. We were trying to make you the next CEO. So preparing you for the future work, what's going on longer term. And that might be, hey, we might have you read a book or take a course. And sometimes they're college level courses. There are some businesses that will have certain people take a whole sabbatical year to go do and work at a college. To literally take a 1-year college program, make their MBA an executive MBA, and there's so on and so forth. And it's, hey, we want you to come back to this company with more knowledge, more experience, better connections, and you're going to take us to the next level. And that's development. So, one thing with training, you have to make it economically worthwhile in terms of what is achieved for the amount of money being spent. And one example of this is how companies will do their college reimbursement funds. And there are companies that will go up front and say, hey, we'll pay for all of your college, but essentially this is at a 3-year loan. So you're going to get your degree, and then over the next 3 years, you're going to have to work for us in order to pay it off. And that was the way my wife got her MBA with Goldman Sachs. Was that they paid out year by year. No, let me rephrase that. They paid it up front. They paid for her MBA up front, and then every year they forgave a third of the amount of money that they paid for. So if it was 30 grand for her MBA over 3 years, they said 10 grand is now forgiven, 10 grand is now forgiven, now the last 10 grand is forgiven. And it worked out perfectly in the sense that someone else paid for her MBA, and then she was able to work for the company, use the knowledge and skills that she developed to further along their progress. When I worked for PepsiCo and was getting my MBA, they were completely different in the sense that they would pay X amount per semester, and that was it. So I did part of my MBA while I was with PepsiCo, and then part of it on my own. So just kind of training and job development techniques, and here is a bunch of examples. You can do web-based instruction, classroom teaching, what we do now, coaching, mentoring, job rotations, conferences and seminars, on-the-job training, and this vestibule training, which I honestly don't remember what that is. But this is not critical other than understanding that there are a lot of ways to train and develop people. And there's actually even more than this. A lot of these things will just happen where if you have a job, you get assigned a mentor. You might do some job rotations so you can see and understand what other people's jobs are to give you a lot better perspective of how everything works in the company and prepare you to be a leader of different departments. So these are just different training and development techniques. All right, so HR also talking about pay and benefits. Components of compensation. Most of us say, hey, the money I get paid, that's part of my compensation. Well, you're absolutely correct, but there's more than just that. And it's more than just the bonus you might get at the end of the year. You might get a $20,000 bonus at the end of the year, but your actual total compensation also includes things like health insurance, life insurance or disability insurance, and then some of the retirement planning that is offered. Every company I've worked for has offered what's called a 401k. That is tax deferred. And what that means is that I'm putting money into a retirement fund before it's taxed, and then I'm letting that money grow tax-free until, or at a point where I'm probably not working and my income tax bracket goes much lower because my income is lower, and that's when I then take the money out and pay taxes on it. And there are a lot of retirement vehicles like that where a company will match. Where PepsiCo matched 3% of whatever I put into that retirement fund. It was more than that. But the point is that match is coming out of their pocket. They also offered stock options, which are a little bit more complicated than stock. My wife was offered stock at Goldman Sachs. But both of these things are just incredible long-term incentives for you as part of your business. And so if you want to look at it, here is another way to look at your base compensation. All the dollars you're paid might be 70 grand, but here we have your 70 grand, and now we have performance bonus, signing bonus, stocks or restricted shares, 401k match, a food bonus because there are places that pay for food, wellness and gym, insurance. Some places provide laundry services. When I worked at the bank, we had a laundry service. So on and so forth are all these little perks that all add in to help increase your compensation or have a more competitive package for you and your business. I think one thing we're going to see real soon is that you're going to see companies offering things like the Peloton classes that you can take, or the Lululemon classes that you can take, because if you're healthy and in shape, it actually lowers the cost of health insurance for the business. So think of we all have a cost associated with us for health insurance, and that business pays that cost. Well, that $5,000 or $10,000 cost might be offset if everyone is really healthy. So businesses usually have some kind of complaint process where, hey, this went wrong. I want to discuss this with someone other than my boss. And that's where HR comes in as well. And their job is to deal with those complaints. And they usually document and write everything down. And there is a formal process for handling complaints. And that's usually done in writing. And that's what this is. This vocab word is the employee complaint procedure. From past experience working at Frito-Lay, we had one as well, where you would essentially write to HR, and HR would take it incredibly serious, and they are serious, and they hold things like hearings, and it could go as far as the company hiring a third-party arbitrator to handle the case, and you would have two sides of the story, and the arbitrator would say, hey, the employee was correct, or hey, the company, the management was correct in the way they handled it. It's an expensive process and companies hate it, so they try and make the rules for companies as clear as possible. So, real quick, have this discussion at your table. I'll pause this video here, or Mr. Barron, pause the video here, and then let's have a quick discussion. Alright, we're back. Let's keep going. Not a lot left. So, ensuring equal opportunity. And they kind of threw this vocab word in there, but the Pregnancy Discrimination Act is a federal law that requires that employers treat their pregnant employees like all other employees when determining benefits. This is becoming less relevant as time goes on, as companies get more competitive packages, and women in the workforce are realized to be an incredible asset. And I think it's the first time in our history where, with the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I heard that there are more female lawyers in law school right now than male students. And I thought that was an awesome fact that I heard. But you're seeing things like new companies and some older companies. The bank that my wife worked at offered 16 weeks of time off, paid time off, when we had both of our children. And you're seeing more and more of that. You're seeing things like not only maternity leave, but paternity leave, where the father gets time off, paid time off as well. These things are, I think, changing our society for the better as we get better benefits all around. And it's interesting to think that the market is really driving that. It's not really always being driven by just one or two companies. The whole market is moving in that direction, which is awesome to see. So the EEOC is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and they protect employees or applicants from discrimination based on color, creed, nationality, origin, religion, sex, age, and or disability. And that is a government entity. So I think we're on the last couple slides here, but sometimes employees do not work out. They perform below expectations. And in these situations, companies may have to resort to things like counseling the employee, putting them through additional training, discipline action in a process for discipline, and then finally termination. So what I found interesting was I was looking this up and I saw here's 10 things not to say when firing someone. This is really hard for me. I'm not sure how to say this. We've decided to let you go. We've decided to go in a different direction. Yeah, duh. We'll work out the details later. Compared to Susan's, your performance is subpar. I understand what you're saying, but here's where you're wrong. You've done a great job here, but we have to reduce the team. I know you weren't happy here, so this is actually a good thing. I need to escort you from the building immediately. Someone will gather your things. I think if you had to fire someone, the best way to do it... Well, here, let me start with this. This was my speech when I did it, and I had to do this at a very young age, where I would say, and I said it like this. I said, Tony, and I'm using Tony because I don't think I have a Tony in class this year. Tony, thank you for coming in today. I wanted to have a discussion with you, and I'm going to be straightforward, but it really boils down to this. Frito-Lay and Tony are going to go in different directions going further. This isn't working out, and I'm going to have to ask you to collect your things and leave today. Your route is already on the road, someone else is running it, and we're just going to have to go with another person, and here's the reasons why. And then I would actually list out all of the times that they had their discipline performance, and in that setting you had a formal discipline process where it went almost like 1 strike, 2 strike, 3 strike, 4, you're out, and every one of those times was documented. In between those documented times was a work with and then a time notified on which I would be checking on that person's stores in the future and talking to their customers. So there was a lot of documentation that went into that for me to be able to go and say, hey, here's all the reasons why you're fired. And a lot of times the employees saw it they saw the writing on the wall, and they would potentially leave the company or move to a different department before it got that far. It was, when you're terminating someone, it shouldn't be a surprise, is I guess what I'm getting at. And I am using some of this language to go in a different direction, but really we're saying that both parties are going in a different direction, not just you. It's almost like saying, hey, this isn't working out for you either, not just me. You're not doing your job. You're not completing what you're supposed to complete. So, and that's where we end. So if you have any questions, you need me to go back to something, let me know. This is our first section on human resources. I hope it went well, and I will talk to you guys next Monday. End of quarter 1. Have a good one.